My mother was born in Poland and moved to Berlin when her elder brother had moved there and had a business of high fashion. And she was involved with the leftist movement and couldn't stay there anymore because they were being hunted, and not just as Jews, but because of the movement. And she went to escape to Luxembourg. My father, as a graduate in Prague, his name was Morris, he left for Luxembourg as well. And that's where they met and married. And after a certain time, they went to Metz in France, where we had family, because they had no way of making a good living in Luxembourg. And that must have been in the beginning of the 30s. And I was born in 1933 in Metz. My second sister was born a year later, also in Metz. My father had a business with 3 brothers. My mother was a homekeeper and made sure that the kids are okay. And, it was a fairly normal life in France. I can't remember all that much because we left France at about age 4 for Antwerp in Belgium, where my father was relocated because of his business. I remember not so much, but we had a stove that kept us warm in the winter, and it was working with coke, which comes like in the shape of eggs, which was delivered to the basement through a grate. And also the things that my father did professionally were the supplies for the sewing trade, tailors and fashion and all kinds. And I was always sneaking into the storeroom to look at things. And one day I decided I'm going to sew something on a machine. And he had the pedal underneath and so on, but everything was a bit too big for me. So I took 2 pieces of cloth and I pushed it, and until my finger got under the needle and it broke, and I was taken screaming to the hospital. And they pulled it out, and then my father took me aside and he said, "You're not going to go in there again without me." So that was a big lesson. Well, in my family, several languages were spoken, and one of them was Yiddish. So obviously we were Jewish related, and most of our friends and other families, some were religious, some were not. And we, at that age, I don't remember if Israel was a factor in it, but we definitely were Jewish, And I remember once going to the synagogue when there was Simchas Torah, where they had the flags, the apples, and all that. And it was a happy memory which stayed with me, I was in a public school where Flemish or Dutch, which is the same, was the language. And one uncle was a very religious person, and he very seldom would come and never eat in our place, So, but otherwise, we were quite, modern company, modern family. What I cherish about my mother most is the way she cared about us, the way the food was adjusted so you wouldn't be forced to eat something when food was scarce. I couldn't eat cooked spinach. My father was the same. Maybe that influenced me. And he called it Gansendreck. And that made it even worse because I understood German, French, and Dutch, and some Yiddish, which they thought was a secret language. My mother's name was Bertha, but her Yiddish name was it's some Polish name. I can't remember it quite. And my father's name was Moshe Avram, but he was not called Maurice. As far as anti-Semitism in my earliest days, I hardly had any occurrences, except once some person asked me, are you Jewish or whatever? And I saw it was not a very nice person. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he went away. Until the beginning of the Second World War, life was fairly normal, and, we had no real problems. We had good food, we had a home and a business, my father. But when the Germans came to Belgium, everything changed. I was told that before the Germans came, they had applied to go to England, and nobody had foreseen that the Germans would come around the Maginot Line and would be there within days. And the Belgian population, the Belgian government, the Belgian police, all cooperated with the Germans. And all the the Jewish people had a stamp in Dutch and French, a red stamp on their ID cards and any documents that were issued. And this already made everything difficult. And then we had to wear a star in the street, and the yellow star, and immediately you go on the defensive. You try to be aware of everything that's happening. Well, wearing the yellow star made a lot of people avoid us, and it caused us to feel like outcasts. Are they better than me? And I was better than them in marbles. It was difficult to kind of digest. There was also a curfew that after, I think it was 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, you couldn't go out of your house. And that made life totally different and more inward, and that you spend your time at home most of the time. I learned about the dangers of Nazism and anti-Semitism in a roundabout way. Because of the curfew, I was playing outside, and I was a fairly good champ with marbles. And the trees along the street had a kind of sandy area where we played. And as I was winning, we just continued, and another guy was in, and so on. And then I realized it was too late. and we all sneaked off. My parents were so worried they thought I was caught by someone. And when I got home, I got the only punishment I ever had in my life. One big clap on my bottom from my father. I think there must have been 5 red fingerprints there. And I did not take it as unjust. It was such an important message that my life could have been taken. And that's when I was explained how dangerous everything was. Luckily, I had what to do, because when Christmas time at school, I was my Akiba, the first A, and I went to the tree, and instead of taking all these different toys, I took the largest Meccano set, which is a kind of metal and bolts and nuts and motors and all kinds of things to build things. And I used that most of the time when I was at home, apart from reading and all kinds of things that my parents would ask me to do. My father was very active in the underground, which they call the Maquis, which is the French and the Belgian resistance. And he was a person in charge of communications, which that was taking back in kind of on paper and disappeared at night. My mother was part of it also. So when I sometimes asked my father, well, what about this? He says, well, some people are evil and some people are good. And luckily, I had the good people that saved my life. In August 1942, I was in the street with my father, which was like with trees and everything, and cafes, music, people talking, a lot of noise. And he was talking to a person that I didn't know, a blonde person. And I was a bit bored, so I was looking at everything. All of a sudden, dead silence in the street. And people were running back and forth. They were coming to get my father. He pushed me towards the person that he was talking to in a loud voice that the approaching brown shirts, that the Belgians, and the black shirts, the SS, came towards us, and in a loud voice says, "Go to your father." Excuse me. He put his arm around my shoulders, and we walked away. He says, "Don't look back. Everything will be okay." After that, I must have either passed out or whatever. I kind of got back to myself in the back of a truck in the middle of the night, driving through the forest. And then we came to, after quite a long time, I was hanging on to the wooden bench, bouncing up and down. We stopped on a kind of bridge where there were 4 monsters, one on each corner. Actually, they're dragons. And for me as a kid, that was even more frightening. Then creaking big gates were opened, and we drove to a castle. And I had read all kinds of stories, Monte Cristo and all kinds of other things, that bad things could happen in a castle. Then this big door opened, and the shadow of a monk, I couldn't see his face because the yellow light was behind him. And he said, "Come on in, you're welcome. Don't be afraid." I was led to a dormitory, shown to a bed. That's your pajamas. These are the clothes. And I couldn't sleep, of course. I was crying. I must have fallen asleep. I had to go to the loo, but I was too afraid. So the worst happened to add to my misery. Whilst I was in my very difficulties during the first period in the castle, and I was crying at night, the priest that was in charge of the dormitory came and took me to the toilet and then sat me down in the other room and said to me, "You have to be strong. You have to be ready for what comes afterwards when you meet your family." He didn't say when you don't meet your family. And make your father proud of you coping with what's happening. And those few simple words were for me something to lean on, and I could cope with the situation. And the next day I was shown around the place and taken to the office. "You are called Willy van Ham. Nobody knows that you are here. We are keeping you safe until we can get you back to your family. You will be taken to your class, and don't worry." When I was given the name and the instructions, part of the instructions was that I'll be showering on my own because I had a certain rash that I didn't want to give to the other kids. Then, at a much later date, I was with a group of kids that looked like mine, but I didn't think that they were Jewish kids also hitting. It was such a normal thing. So there were 12 of us in the showers. So it was very smart of them to do that. And no, of course, nobody knew, and we never discussed that with the other kids. I learned a lot about the Catholic religion because each day in the class there was a section for that. But the school was very high standard, and I liked learning, of course, and reading. And after a while, I kind of got used to the place, and the only thing that kept me from going maybe mad was the music. Because I was a soprano, a young kid, I sang in the choir for the church and the chapel, and the music from Bach and from others kind of uplifted me, because at home we had this huge wooden box with a gramophone in it, and my father listened to tenors and operas, and so I had this background, and it reminded me of my home. That the prince used to have for orphans and that and poor people camps during the summer on his grounds. And that was transformed as a full-time kind of location for orphans of the war. The food that we were getting in the thing wasn't maybe not a Michelin type of thing, but it was pretty good. And the prince himself used to come in and taste the soup if it was sufficiently good for the children. It was really, really taking good care of us. In the castle, things weren't always felt always that safe. One night we were told the Germans are coming here now to check the place, they want to find a pilot that fell down in the area, and they're coming to check. So if they come into the dormitory, you just, even if you wake, you don't move, you just stay the way you are under the covers. And actually it happened. They came in. I was scared stiff because my nights weren't always full of sleep, obviously. And we stayed and we waited, and we heard the German language and the officer yelling, do this, do that. And then they left, they stomped out. And then even then we didn't move, for a long time. And that happened twice during our stay there. And so those were scary moments. And, it was not just scary for me, it was scary for all the children. We stayed in the castle maybe a year and a half until the mother of one of the hidden children found out where it was and came for a visit. And that was a dangerous thing for the prince, who the Germans would have killed him. That very night, we were taken away and put in different places. That school afterwards, when I did searches, was considered one of the top schools in Belgium, where the rich and the famous and the princes have their kids. So I had an excellent education, which helped me, of course, later in life. And so again, I was still singing at that time. And when we were taken to the cathedral, after the singing, we were given a rare piece of cake, which we hadn't seen since we left our homes, So I integrated with whatever was happening. And so even today, I know more about Catholicism than I know of my own religion, Well, at night, I used to have nightmares. Of course, I didn't know that about the camps and whatever that, but I knew that they were taking Jewish people away. And so it was, and after a while, my worries turned into maybe fantasies, imagining after the war, all to be back together again. And I only knew about two sisters. The third one was born after I was taken away. And so it was kind of a survival technique, or whatever you would call it, And I kept going until the end of the war. And of course, I participated in everything that was happening there, and we went for long walks in the forest. And in the forest once, I saw in the distance an apple tree. And apples were something we didn't see. And I yelled out, apples, of course, in Dutch. And everybody looked at me, and I ran, so they all ran after me. And then some of the apples weren't ripe, but they ate everything. They was totally denuded. And later on in life, when I met some of the people that were hidden with me in this place, and we were talking to each other, he said, "Oh, you were the one that gave us all diarrhea with eating these green apples." When liberation came, I was transferred to France because I was a French-born person in a place called Profonsard. And there I was on my own. I didn't know anybody from my family. And one day, 3 girls were brought, and they said, "They're your sisters." Miriam was hidden in a convent. In reconnaissance to the convent that she survived the war, she kept the name Maria, which she had. And I kept my name Willy, that I had. And the youngest one was called Lillian, and that I found afterwards, because all the documents that we could recoup from the government in our searches, which I did for 2 weeks in a 2-week stay in Belgium, and this, it was what I found. I found out a lot of information from a Belgian school teacher that, together with another 11 Jewish women, had saved nearly 5,000 children and hidden them during the war. This lady kept a record in 6 books. Each book was hidden in a different place, and each book had some information about a child, either the age or the first name. Another one had the second name, and so on, so that people after the war could find out who these children are that were hidden, because they all had false names. And I went to see the lady when she was already in her late 80s or in her mid 80s, and it was such a fantastic thing. And she told me about all how she had her big sorrow. Her husband was a Jewish lawyer, and she was not Jewish. And she said, we used to go to families, told them prepare a small valise with some clothes or favorite toy, but not much more. And we will come and pick them up on that day. Some days she said she turned up and the family was gone, already taken away by the Germans. She was called Mademoiselle, and everybody knew her as Mademoiselle. And her real name was Andree Geulen. I also tried to find out who the resistance fighter was who was with my father. All the files of resistance, of police, of municipality, and army were closed by fiat by the Belgian government for 100 years. All my research that I have in 2 huge folders and what my writings are will be given to my sons, and in 2042 or 2040 or whatever it's going to be, when the files will be open, they'll be able to go and find out, because there are many other reasons. I speculated, after I've been reading lots of things about the resistance after the war, that they were divided into 2, the leftists and the Gaullists. And the Gaullists, if they knew somebody was Jewish, they hated them even doubly. And probably they were part of the cause of it, but of course I cannot be sure of that, you know. But from what I read, it seems to be what happened. And of course, I never saw my father again, you know, and nor my mother. And they were put into camps, and whatever happened after. And my two sisters, of course, were given to two families, and then they were given over after a year or so to the government, saying that they were not really their child. And then they were put into private families that kept them. Two of them were hidden in Switzerland, and one was hidden in a convent in Namur, Belgium. And my older sisters, of course, remembered me, and the youngest one I didn't even know existed. And at the age of 12, 11, 12, I became the father of the family. We were there for a few months, and then the Red Cross had found an uncle in Melbourne, Australia, and we were told we will be sent to Australia. We were sent to Australia on a Yugoslavian ship, which is cargo and passengers, and which went first to Haifa with the orphans that couldn't find any family. And they were distributed amongst adoptive or in kibbutzim and places like that. And we stayed on the Mount Carmel in a small hotel until the ship had unloaded whatever it was. And we were taken back, and the captain kind of took us under his arm, I should say, and I was holding the steering wheel, and he taught us some Yugoslavian, and I still remember a few words and how to count, and that until we got to Melbourne. My uncle and aunt, which was not my real aunt because my uncle had lost his wife and two sons to the Germans. He was living in Berlin and kind of overlived in a cellar which was like a dungeon throughout the war. And he made it to Australia because he knew we had some relatives there. And then in Australia, I had to have bar mitzvah. And I didn't know anything. So I was taught just the prayer for how to open the Torah, which I repeated word by word anyway. And I got bar mitzvah there, you know. And there I went to high school. And from high school, I went to college, which is now called MIT because it's Melbourne Technical College, and became a electronic engineer, and I worked for RCA a few years. During all that time, I was earning fairly good money, and I helped my sisters, you know, and so on. I felt I had a duty to look after them. And I managed. I didn't have any youth. I was working all through my high school, all through my college. I didn't have any spare time for myself. And that caused some other problems for me in later life because I had no way of how do you approach a woman, how do you deal with this. I had no thing, It's already all very nice to read about it, but it's not the same thing as a mother or a father. Well, the thing that influenced me to go to Israel was when I was studying in the Melbourne Library, which was it's a huge library. It looks like a Roman edifice. It was one block away from the college. And I studied always in the same spot where all the engineering and other things books were. And there was a table with about 8 or 9, varying when they come, in that area. And one day they said, "Why don't you join us?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing electronic engineering." "Oh, we are doing this engineering. We are doing that engineering." So I joined them. They were all Jewish, and they were all part of Hashomer Hatzair that wanted to form a garin to go to Israel. So I joined their meetings where they were being taught about Israel, and we learned some songs and a few words of Hebrew. We didn't know much Hebrew. And when I worked for a few years, some of those others were already finishing their studies, but some of them were younger and hadn't yet finished their courses. We decided to wait till everybody was ready to go. I have to do my bit so that the Jewish people will have a place to go to where there's no danger. There was a war going on for the Gaza war, and they wouldn't let anybody in. So we volunteered. Now we don't take volunteers unless they're trained by the Israeli army. When I got to Israel, the idea was to go on a kibbutz, like the same as the other group of people. Some went to Habonim kibbutz and some went to the more leftist kibbutz like me. And I went to kibbutz Nirim. I tried my best in the kibbutz, and I came to realize to have an ideal society, you need ideal people, and not everybody was pulling on the string the same way. I think I spent nearly 40 years in Israel. I met my wife in Israel. I don't think I thought of myself as a Holocaust survivor so much as a Holocaust experience of my family made me want to somehow not make it not happen again. And not happen again was the only answer, was Israel. And that's what pushed me to go to Israel. It could happen again. It's not difficult to imagine. And that made me feel that I have to be part of trying to avoid it. And the only way we can avoid it is to have a strong and vibrant Israel. First, that the Jewish people themselves realize what could possibly happen, and that the only way is Israel. And the other thing is that the non-Jewish people realize what injustice this is, and that we are no different to anyone else. One thing I always say to people, if you believe in God, you think there is only one God. And if there's only one God, then everybody's God is the same. And it doesn't matter what you call him or what your way of religion is. And of course, this also means that they have to be tolerant of other people as well, not just Jews. I don't believe that God is going to fish everybody out and put them somewhere else or save their lives or whatever. All the horrible things that happen even now, where is God? So I don't believe in actually a God. I think that a God is in us and that we are the gods that can save ourselves. It doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, what you believe, how you live, or how different you are from one another. We are all made from the same universe. And that's it.